So basically, I kind of titled it Primate Canopy Ecology because I kind of want to connect like what canopy ecologists have been doing and functional ecologists. So people are really looking at tree species and their traits with what's going on with primates, and kind of like I'm trying to kind of connect those two kind of academic bubbles. And that's what they really are. Like sometimes people, like Adam kind of indicated, like people work in their own little bubble and they really should connect with other folks. So you guys already know me. My name is Griette van der Heide. Sometimes I can't pronounce it because now I hear I say Griette all the time. So I also got trained to facilitate groups and instruct groups, and I will let you know in a little bit why. And I'm currently a PhD candidate at CU Boulder, so that's in Colorado. And I have a degree in forest and nature conservation from the Netherlands, my home country. Okay, and I kind of want you to look at this picture. So this is these are pictures from my first tree climbing experience. And so this was in Panama where Adam was as well. So in some pictures, I'm actually featuring Adam trying to do rescue techniques. And I need to talk to him because I don't know how he did this. I know it was a Joe method. I don't remember how he did this. So anyway, Joe used to take us up onto this platform. So his first day was like, okay, let's climb this like this really tall ficus and let's go to this platform at 93 feet. And we're like, okay. So that's what we did like right on the first day. So how did I get into tree climbing? Because we're trying to connect this a little bit to our connections. And I think if everyone kind of thinks back to their youth, they probably can trace it back like way to the past. So I think that's kind of what happened with me. Like I was a Girl Scout for a long time, and in the Netherlands we just called Scouts. We don't really have this weird distinction in different organizations. Just Scouts, people that go out in nature and play games and do music and sit around campfires and learn all sorts of things about tents and everything basically. And so my parents basically sent me to the Scouts because they have 4 children and we're like, we cannot pay for expensive hobbies, so please just go to Scout organization. So I did that when I was like 7 or 8, and then I stayed, and then when I was 16 I became a Scout leader. So this is actually a picture of like the Scouts that I led. So I was basically in nature, like camping at least once a month and in nature pretty every weekend. So that's a big influence. And then weirdly, I lived in this town that's close to a town with a zoo that has like this giant jungle. So, zoos often have jungles, but I've never seen anything like this. Like I've been to many zoos, and this is just like, you can literally get lost. That's how big it is. So if you ever are in the Netherlands, it's in Arnhem, Burger Zoo it's called, not that far from Germany. So the zoo itself, like the old part, is just kind of typical zoo, but then they have this giant jungle. So we used to go there, schools take students there for excursions to learn about rainforest and rainforest creatures. So I was just really lucky to grow up in the Netherlands. And then the weirdest thing is that there's also a zoo in like my hometown. It's called Apeldoorn Primate Park. So there are lots of primates, and half of them are free ranging. So you literally get in and you're just like amongst the primates. So for example, the squirrel monkeys, I worked with them. And so there are like 150 just all around you in the forest. And just, the people, there are many rules of not touching them, not feeding them, of course, to keep them safe. But it's a very strange and unique park. So I only went there, I think, once when I was like 13. And then I needed a job when I was like 16 or 17, and I applied. And so I started working there. So I worked there for like 10 years, as part-time, seasonal. I probably spent about 100 days a year, at least, at the zoo. So that was like a really weird experience. And that went on for like 10 years. And then I went to Wageningen University because it was like, well, I just really like forest, and I really like tropical forest. So I want to study that. And so I studied forest and nature conservation, and I really focused on like the tropical aspects. So is this like, kind of these things that just all come together in life, I would say. And it's, I just kind of got lucky. Like my parents never really took me to a forest, but it just had all these other opportunities. So always take the opportunities that are given to you. So after that, during my master's, I went to Bolivia to do some research for my thesis. And so this was at a Bolivian Forestry Institute, but it's an NGO. So they do independent research, not for the state. But Bolivia just kind of accepted this law that forests kind of had to be managed with indigenous people together, that everything had to be sustainable. So we went to this little town first, and from there it was a 3-hour drive to get into the forest. And I'm not going to zoom in now, but I actually found it yesterday. It took me a lot. I never found it on the map again where we stayed, but in the smacking middle. So you go to this town, and then we basically go in 3 hours into this giant green area, and there's no one there because it's just part of this logging concession that has been FSC certified. So they do sustainable logging as far as that's possible. And they take care of the people that work for them. They protect the animals and fish. So people are not allowed to fish or hunt. It's not a perfect system, but if you're ever going to buy any wood for whatever reason, just, look at if it's certified, and at least you're on the safer side or the better side. So that's where I went in the smacking middle. We would be there for 3 weeks at a time. We would carry our food with us. Because it was so far, our truck actually had an extra tank of gasoline, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get out again. Things like that. Sometimes we would get stuck. We would all have to sit in the bed of the truck to get in. It was a crazy experience. And I don't think I realized how crazy it was until I kind of, perhaps settled down 10 years later and was wait, what did I do? So that's where I went. It was very amazing. This was my research assistant, or we would rotate and work with different people, but we actually worked very well together. So it was kind of his preference to work with me. And he is it was just crazy, what he knew. I would sometimes lose him because he wouldn't say anything. And then he would come back an hour later, and he was well, Griette, I just went to this tree that I saw with fruits, and I climbed it and got some fruits. What's the problem? It's I don't know where you were. I was just sitting here. So he would do things like that because he knew everything about the forest. Because back in the days before it was certified, basically what people did, they would send in their employees like him, and basically the timber company would just say I need mahogany. Go find, a grove of mahogany. And they would just go in, and basically, the message was, do not come back until you have found it. So you would just go in, live off, the forest, whatever you could find. And then after 30 or 60 days, when they finally found something, they would trace their way back to the offices and be this is where it is. And so that's a very bad way of doing kind of forestry, of getting timber. It's very destructive. But that's what used to be his job until he started working more for the researchers. So we lived in this little camp. So now you can go to the map in Bolivia and you can enter Campamento La Chonta, and then it pops up and it kind of says that you can eat there. Well, this is not an eatery. This is a really tiny camp in the forest. And I mainly looked at dense understory plants and kind of see what the effect was on regeneration. So these heliconia stems that are just super, super dense and fern stems. See what the effect was on regeneration and kind of on things like seed removal from the understory, which affects regeneration. But then I was always following these monkeys, these spider monkeys. So Don Bicho, this guy would be there's spider monkeys, let's go. And we'll just go and follow the spider monkeys and leave the plants behind because they kind of stay where they are. So that was a good thing. Then I did some traveling in this really amazing place where it's a little rehabilitation center. They're really successful, called Intiwari. And so these primates, they were raised by people. So this kind of a touristy thing. But Bolivia is just very, very, very beautiful. Very beautiful, amazing experience. And so, but in the meantime, I not while I was in Bolivia, but I kept working at the zoo. So I would go back to the Netherlands and go back to the zoo. So even though my thesis was kind of really focused on forest ecology, I loved primates. So I was what do I do with this? And so in the Netherlands, you often have to do 2 theses or an internship. So I did an internship in Argentina. So I worked with these little owl monkeys in Argentina. I was basically a research assistant, like a field manager, a little bit of a project manager. And I actually stayed for almost 2 years. So I was in this Chaco forest in Argentina. All right, so then I decided, how do I keep working in the tropics and with primates? Like, that's not easy, as you might know. So I decided to try to do a PhD. So I applied to graduate school, got in, and I went to Texas, San Antonio. And I really love Texas. And people ask me, like, are you sure you want to go to Texas? And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure Texas is like really similar to Formosa in terms of heat. So I think I can manage, and I did manage. So, but yeah, it's very hot. Those two places are very similar in that respect. And then for kind of to test, study ideas or research ideas. So I always wanted to work in Africa. And, when you're younger, you don't really understand the world. Sometimes when you're older, you still get things very mixed up. But when I was young, I always wanted to study the Amazon in Africa. So I thought that the Amazon is actually in Africa. So I really wanted to work in Africa, but in the Amazon in Africa. So I did not get until I was like, at least, I don't know how old, but like this was like in elementary school when I thought this. So I discovered that the Amazon is then in Africa. So I kind of had to like, choose. But I did really want to work in Africa, mostly because the primates there are very different. So these are very different groups of primates in, the Americas, basically, and what we find in Asia and Africa. And so I really wanted to like keep working with, paleotropical primates, we call them, or old world monkeys. So I went to Kibale National Park, which is in Uganda. A lot of research has been done there, mostly because Uganda has been a relatively safe place throughout the decades to be. And so this is a place where most of the chimp research actually comes from Kibale National Park. So we were at this little field, well, it's actually a huge field station with lots of people. I'd always joke that I was like in America, in Uganda. There were so many Americans from different universities. And it was just a really different experience because, the forest is really amazing. It's very different. And then it's like interspersed by kind of these swamp forests. And so there are elephants. And so it's a really kind of it was a way more kind of like dangerous experience where assistants would be like, yeah, let's not go into the swamp forest because if there are elephants, we cannot get out, basically. And that's true because I would like sink in with like my backpack with all my tree climbing gear. And like there was no way to move. So they would always want to like, triple check. Does anyone know if there are elephants in the neighborhood? And like they would come into camp. So it wasn't like super unpredictable, but they would all like talk to each other every day, like where are the elephants? Where are the elephants? And they're like super scared of elephants. And there was this one time and we were just like having lunch. And so luckily I had all my tree climbing gear like in my backpack. And like this elephant just started like vocalizing and my research assistant just like got up and like took off and like it was 50 meters away. And then he turned around. He was like, Griette, are you okay? And he like totally forgot about me. So I like grabbed my backpack and like, yeah, I'm fine. I'll meet you there. So totally different experience. It's very rich. So there are 11 primate species. And so many of those are eat a lot of fruits. And so when I would go up into trees, I would basically like meet 2 or 3 primate species at a time. Even though it was my intention to actually not be with primates in the canopy tops. So part of this is because often as a researcher, you kind of have to tell committees how your research is kind of like ethical, you're not harming things and people and your study animals. So I kind of wrote to these committees like, I'm going to try to not be in the trees when the primates are there. And when they do come in, I'm going to be very quiet and wait until they go away. So those were kind of like my rules for doing research. So I would have lines up in trees and different ficus species. And I would basically climb them every, 2 or 3 days, especially when they were starting to like ripen, like the fruits. And I would collect the fruits and do a bunch of measurements, collect their scent, collect samples for nutritional analysis. And so I would like get up at the crack of dawn and try to be in the tree and collect samples before the monkeys got in and like one, grabbed all my fruits basically, and two, so I wouldn't be like stuck there with them. Even though that was amazing, but yeah, because those were kind of the rules. Then one time, another group asked me to, they actually could climb. They'd just been trained by Harv, but they had no experience basically. So they ended up kind of like being stuck with their research. And so they were using all my climbing lines to like go up in the same trees, but then for their kind of objectives. And so one time, to thank me, they wanted to take me with them to a place very far away with a really big ficus on this ridge, and that chimpanzees would go to all the time. So these were like chimp researchers. So I was like, sure. So we went there and they got their rope stuck. They couldn't get it back. And I was like, well, I need to get samples anyway. Let me just help you out. Let me go up. And so I went up, and then like they all like communicated with walkie-talkies. So these chimp researchers work in like teams of like 6 to 12 assistants, because chimps can kind of split up in subgroups, and then they would just like all go with another subgroup. And you're never allowed to work alone in the forest here because of the elephants. And so I heard them on the walkie-talkie as I was in a tree crown, and they were like, yeah, the chimps are coming. And so the chimps came, and I could not get out of the tree in time. So I was like really high up in the tree. I got kind of lucky because this was a ficus that grows like fruits straight from the trunk. So it's kind of like, what do you call it? Yeah, it's just kind of like this picture, but then more down on the trunk. So they kind of all stayed below me, and they didn't do anything. Like only I kind of like was, they kind of, you know, the younger ones I kind of felt bad for because they didn't dare to go into the tree. So I did feel like I was disturbing their kind of natural behavior. But also I was really happy that they kind of like left me alone, and they were just like, okay, whatever, you know. And so after about an hour or so, they were finally done eating and they left. And I just like, I collected all the samples that everyone wanted. And then I went down and I just inhaled water and food. And that's when I learned that you never go up into a tree without water and food. So because anything can happen. And so it was an amazing experience. And then I got back very late in camp, and everyone was like, where were you? Where were you? And so I explained the story, and then they were all like, you know, wow, this is insane. And so it was a little bit insane. I do not recommend repeating that because it was a little bit of an uncertain situation, but it all worked out. So, okay. And actually I wrote about this in a little blog post for the GOTC. So it's actually on the internet in some ways. So I want to like connect a little bit like to some of the teams. So I don't know if you looked at all the pictures of me tree climbing, you might have noticed a few things. So then when I actually switched universities because my advisor went somewhere else, and so I went to Colorado. So I got to know Harv. Now, Harv has a lot of wisdom, as you might have noticed. And the late Joe Mayer also had a lot of wisdom, but they had different sets of wisdom basically when it comes to like tree climbing. And so Harv, the first thing he told me was, yeah, you need to wear a helmet. So I was never wearing a helmet. Like for years, I would climb trees without a helmet. I would climb on 9 mil because that's what like Joe did. I would always use the yo-yo system because that was his favorite system. I would often use beaners that were not auto-locking because Joe was really kind of like, you know, kind of like low gear kind of thing approach, like cheap if possible, lightweight if possible, so you can kind of sneak off into the forest and just do your thing. And so, yeah, so I just took that. It's like, okay, that's what you do. And then Harv was like, no, because I wanted to do a facilitator's course. Because as I was in Uganda, I actually felt partially unsafe because I couldn't really train anyone. I felt like I didn't have that kind of experience to do that or the knowledge, and I kind of felt I couldn't be responsible for that. So even though I did some like demonstrations and my assistants there were kind of trained like brown people, you know, so they would like set my lines and get my pruning pole up and stuff like that, and like, you know, catch the samples from the canopy. And, you know, I let them up, you know, like a few meters so they could kind of like get the experience, but I didn't feel I could train them. So I felt like, well, this is not fair like these people should be trained. And two, I felt a little bit unsafe because I really had it in my mind. If something happens, no one understands these systems. So that's why I started connecting with Harv. So we did facilitator training and then much later instructor training. So he was very strict about a lot of things. So I changed basically a lot of my gear to auto-locking carabiners. Helmets came into my life. So now when I train students or assistants, like they all have to wear a helmet. You know, we're using different systems, or at least like we're showing different systems, or at least what I do. I changed my preferred systems, and now I normally use a rope wrench to get up. And so, yeah, things kind of changed. I got these triple, you know, auto-locking carabiners. I actually just got them in the mail yesterday. Started using bow and arrow that someone taught me. So that was the awesome thing when I started connecting with other tree climbers through GOTC in the rendezvous, that they taught me all these like little tricks. And so it's really easy and lightweight to just take a bow and arrow with you. And you have to kind of rig it so it works for like setting lines, but it's really nice. Started using like foot ascenders, other ropes that were not 9 mil or 8 mil sometimes. So yeah, my life really changed in that respect. So don't know if this ancient wisdom or modern knowledge what happened here, but it was definitely a shift. And so I'm really happy that I kind of got that experience from other tree climbers. That really helped. Okay, so I will now talk a little bit about my research. So unlike Adam, I do not have my results yet because it just came back. So my data is on paper, in databases, in Python, in all sorts of different locations where it can be analyzed. And so I'm just gonna explain kind of what I'm trying to get at. So how I'm trying to connect these two different fields that I've been interested in, because I started out as a basically forest ecologist, right? And then I turned to primates. So I know kind of the ins and outs of like both disciplines in a way. Okay, so what I noticed about primatologists is that sometimes like they look at the monkeys or other primates and they forget kind of that there's this entire forest that's complex and that we don't really understand, that might be, you know, important to understand to actually get at what the primates are doing. So they tend to follow primates around, habituate them, so they kind of get used to you as a researcher and like display their normal behavior. That can take up like a year, more than 2 years for species like chimps or baboons. It takes a really long time, so there's lots of effort that goes into that. And then it takes years basically to get enough kind of behavioral data to say something about, well, general social behaviors, but also things like diet and other ecological aspects. And so this research is really necessary. Like that's a good thing that we're doing. And like Adam indicated, you know, research takes a long time and good research takes a long time. And I'm a little bit on the other side where I'm like, and so I understand it, but like, in the meantime, forests and primates are disappearing. So if we don't kind of like move things along and think about different ways to study these animals and their relationships with trees and, you know, the forest they live in general, we're gonna lose them. And that's a really like big reality. And there have been lots of studies that basically indicate like within 50 to 100 years, we lose like half of the primate species. And just like probably with lizards, there are about 300 primate species. And I would say that we studied 10% of those really well. And another like 40% we studied sometimes. And of another 50%, we don't know anything. So that's a lot of information that we just don't have. And it's not that we don't know that they exist. We know they exist. We're just not studying them. So yeah. So I kind of decided that I want to really connect forest ecology to, you know, what the primates are doing, that the link is kind of missing. Yeah, because just these disciplines are not talking to each other. So it's easier to do something like this and test it out in a system that's simpler than Uganda, because Uganda is a more diverse forest. But in a Chaco, you have about, where I worked, about 60, 65 tree species. So it becomes a lot more manageable to know a lot of information about how these tree species live together and then how they're related to what the monkeys are doing. And the other thing about the Chaco is that no one knows about it. Like, I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the Gran Chaco, but I dare to say it's almost nobody. So it's really endangered. There's lots of logging going on, land conversion. There are actually in the entire Gran Chaco, there are more than I think 100 indigenous peoples, basically different communities. And people just do not hear about the Chaco. So it's kind of like this underdog because it's like there's the Amazon and everyone knows the Amazon. But like the second largest forested region in South America is the Chaco. It's just a drier forest. It's not as like, you know, it's not as cool, basically. It's not your typical rainforest. It's just not as magical. It's hot and it gets very cold in winter. So people just kind of tend to ignore it. And that has been like devastating because if you ignore places, they get less attention and then probably more logging and land conversion takes place. And just in general, I think many people do not know that this entire kind of area, it's called the dry diagonal, in South America, it consists of like woodlands, things that look a little bit like savanna or really scrubby areas, and then the Gran Chaco. So you can get from here and start walking, you'll never see a rainforest in your life. So a lot of people kind of don't know this. So these are kind of like some of the different habitat types you can get in the Chaco. So it's a very diverse region. There are lots of differences between like east and west. So you get like kind of wetland areas with lots of different bird species and things like caiman, or lots of caiman. Also almost stepped on one of those while watching monkeys. There are these kind of palm savannas and these little patches of forest that are really drought adapted. And then there are these gallery forests along rivers. So there's actually a river running here that I cut off. And so these are more like, you know, drier forests. There are lots of deciduous trees, not all of them. But it can sometimes, when it's like winter, I look at it and say, oh, I could actually imagine me just being in Europe, because you don't really see it's like a subtropical or tropical, depending on where you are, kind of forest. So yeah, a very different kind of ecosystem. And in Argentina, there are 2 primate species living there, but like in other regions, there are like actually way more primate species living there. So like in Bolivia. This is kind of the distribution. I worked in Formosa at the All Monkey Project and in this little forest patch. So people often say like, oh, but it's really fragmented, something is off. But this kind of fragmentation is actually natural, because these are kind of the savanna areas, and so the soils get really like saturated, and tree species are just not adapted to like live there, except for this palm species. So these are natural areas, natural, you know, fragmentation, which in and of itself is like interesting to study, to understand more about, you know, what then kind of anthropogenic fragmentation will do and how that's different. So sometimes it does really look like a jungle. It has a lot of lianas and vines. I don't know why. I mean, it's a little bit typical of drier forest to have more lianas and vines, or at least lianas. It's kind of like a weird trend you see in South America. So sometimes it looks like this typical tropical forest, and then sometimes, like I said, just like you can imagine you're somewhere else, basically. So it's not really, you know, this place where people want to go to. If you're new, you've never seen a tropical forest, you'll say like, oh, wow. But if you've seen a tropical forest, you're like, oh, what's this? This is really different. And there are lots of mosquitoes. It's a really harsh environment to work in. And this is actually a typical tree species. It's a Phytolacca species, or ambu, they call it, and actually doesn't make good wood. So when I was climbing it, so they call it a yerba, like a herb. And they would always say, like, you cannot climb this, you cannot climb this. Like, this doesn't make wood. It's not a tree. And I'm like, well, looks like a tree. It acts like a tree. It just has bad wood. Like, what do we do? So I found a good one, and I did go up. But I had these moments as I was going up, because my assistants kept yelling, like, you're climbing a yerba, you're climbing a herb. What are you doing? So, but I did go up, and it was amazing. I had amazing views, and nothing happened. Like, this was a sturdy tree. So I told them, like, please tell your professors in Argentina that ambus are trees. You know, they do a good job at being that. So, so these are the little primates, and you already saw them before that I studied. This guy is sitting in a little Myrcianthus, which is a Myrtaceae. They get really nice kind of berries that are you know, sweet, good to eat. And so they're kind of weird because they are monogamous. They only live with another adult and some offspring. And so they live in these tiny territories. So all of their kind of food has to be available there. And so I really wanted to find out like what is in these territories and like how do they kind of like survive of these food resources, and are all these territories like kind of the same in what they're offering. So this in the human Chaco, we study them there because they're not completely nocturnal in other parts. So they're really widely distributed, the genus, and they're all nocturnal. So they have this very kind of like weird niche in South America. So they're doing something different than other primates. But in the Chaco, they also are active during the day, so we can actually like see them. So that's nice. And so yeah, so basically what I was trying to get at, so this is my really scientific thing that I had to like, you know, present to a committee, is this it kind of indicated, it's like really looking at from the bottom up, like which tree species are there, what is kind of the composition, and then what kind of traits, like nutrients, toxins, you know, heights of trees, like are there, because in the end, primates just really don't care about species, right? They don't care that you call something a banana or an apple. They just care about like what's in there. Like, can we eat it? Can we reach it? You know, is there a good like crop of these things? Kind of anthropomorphizing. But you're saying like species, or is just like, you know, a human concept? Like primates and other animals don't necessarily care about it, right? There are differences between species, and they, you know, if those are really clear, then they care about that. But there might also be many species that are just very similar. You know, if you think about an apple and a pear, does it really matter which one you are eating? You know, perhaps not. So I think sometimes we're overcomplicating things by considering every species to be something totally different, because some of these guys, for example, in the Myrtaceae family, like they're all kind of doing a similar things. They all have little berries. They all kind of have similar growth forms, you know. And so probably to the primates, they're not that different. So yeah, so that's what I was trying to kind of get at. So instead of kind of mapping like species spatially, what we really need to do is like map like traits, right? So what are the traits that are available over space? What are the nutrients, or what are the toxins so they don't go there, instead of like, this is A, this is B. So that's kind of like a different approach. So then there's lots of scientific stuff going on. I'm not going to bore you with this, but this is what kind of Adam was talking about. Sometimes this takes a very long time because scientific communities do want to know exactly why you're studying this. Is this a gap in the literature? How do you connect this to existing theories and stuff like that? So you do kind of have to like really validate your research and be able to kind of sell it, which sounds weird, but that's actually what's going on, especially when you're doing a PhD. So I did do that, like as I said, I connect this to theories from forest ecology, basically, about how trees are living together and for what reason, and whether or not they're distinct. So yeah, I did that. So that's just enough for you, but we do have to do all of that work. And then, so I kind of like presented this to my committee. So I'm going to go tree climbing. Luckily, they didn't ask any questions about that. So that was good. And I would take like samples from the crown. So I always had like little pruner, or actually a really long pruner with me. And then I would collect kind of like information on what we call functional traits, things like, you know, maximum height and like leaf size and bark thickness, which all kind of like determine whether or not like these trees can like occur together, or if they're like very similar or not. So collected that. But then to kind of like map these species, so you can then kind of connect these traits to them over space, you can use imagery from like satellites, but the free stuff isn't really like at a small scale. So you can't really get it to trees. You might get it like, well, this is like a patch that's kind of like swampy forest, like habitat types perhaps. For the really good stuff, you need to beg like agencies to release their data to you, or buy it, and it's expensive. So satellite imagery, often when it's like high resolution, so 30 centimeters, 50 centimeters, you're going to pay hundreds to thousands of dollars basically. So instead of doing that, I asked for funds, and I got a lot of funds from NSF and my university, actually, and from National Geographic. So we invested in a drone. So I will kind of like show this video. It makes a lot of noise. Like, these are big drones because you need to like connect cameras to them that are heavy. So if they are small drones, then they don't take off. Makes a tons of noise. So you fly them really high, like 100 meters above the canopy. If you fly them too low, you get too, detailed kind of like information. You fly them too high, you might lose them. The idea is that you always see your drone, but if you're flying over forest, like, it's really easy to lose them, and you kind of have to rely on your little tablet with like the flight path and the information. We did kind of abandon this a little bit because of COVID, because we couldn't get to the field enough to kind of maintain that. And at some point we needed a few parts, and it was just, we just couldn't get them because everything was just closed. So I'm gonna keep part of this for like a later project. And so in the meantime, I am begging these agencies to release satellite imagery to me to kind of like fill that gap. So yeah, we did collect most data that we needed, even with the limited time on like the tree species. So we did get to about the 60 tree species, and we got functional traits and samples. So some of the typical tree species are this Handroanthus, the called Lapacho or trumpeter flower tree. So during the dry season, like kind of after they start flowering, and you'll just see like patches of like pink everywhere in the forest. And after the winter, this really kind of like lifts up people, lifts up their spirits once these like pink flowers start popping up everywhere. So they're really like easy to localize. This is Timbo, it's called Interolobium, or black ear. So like the pods are kind of like ear shaped, they're super black. When they're unripe, the primates will actually eat them. Primates will also eat these flowers. This Pentapanax, which is very like an easily recognizable tree species. There's one palm in the forest, Pindo, Chiagres, so they also eat that a lot. And then this is a Saiba, which you guys have seen before, but they're in the drier parts of the forest, in these forest patches. And so it's called Palo Borracho in Spanish, which means like drunk tree, because they get these big bellies, basically, that they fill with water to get to dry seasons. And so, yeah, they're very like typical part of these forests in South America, especially the drier ones. And they have all these nasty like spikes or spines, and so they're not like fun to climb. And there are a couple of other species that are really, there's one species, the Ditchian, that like forms like needles that just keep growing. So they have like these clusters of just needles. So I learned from that. I climbed one of those, and it took me a day basically to get to the ficus that was growing in that tree and then collect fruits. So lots of strange effort to get fruits and leaf samples. And I kind of added this picture here with rainfall, because as you might know, 2020 was like an extremely dry year in South America. And it started like even before 2020. So there were hardly any fruits. And then by the time there were finally fruits in like December 2021, and it started raining. So I think I was literally in Argentina for like 8-9 months just without rain. Like I think there were literally 5 days in which there was like twice, like 2 hours of a little bit of, twice a day or whatever, 2 hours of a little bit of rain. So even when I arrived, I went to the forest and I knew the forest, and I just got there, and it was so summer, so wet season. And I got there and was like, where are the fruits? And it was just nothing. And there were no births that season. So very few animals or infants basically. And the weird thing is that you could see all the other animals, because there was no understory left, because there was a lot of leaf fall and not that many new leaves. And so you could see every animal in the forest. Like every day I saw armadillos, every day we were like looking at capybaras that I never saw before. And they were just everywhere because it was so dry and you could see everything. But Many also, like the ranchers, really complained that they did not have, you know, any offspring, like they were not doing well. Like so basically all animals were just, entire South America was just dry, dry, dry. Lots of fires to the south of us, where there's a station with howler monkeys, where they're studying howler monkeys. Half the forest burned down and half the howler monkeys died. It was like really, really extreme. And so I kind of had to abandon the entire fruit part. Also, when we did have fruits, we went back in lockdown, so I couldn't collect them. So I mainly focused on leaves. Did collect tons of samples with the help of like a huge research team. Mostly in 2020, kind of at the end, right before I went back. So did get things done, but definitely not like what I kind of expected. Then the other thing I was doing, and what I kind of like, you know, sold to like National Geographic, is that we, like I said in the beginning, that it's not smart of us to only like habituate primates and do this really kind of slow kind of study, and that we need to kind of have like more quick ecological knowledge on like what primates are eating. And that we don't always need to know like they're eating this for so many hours a year, but we just need to know like, okay, this fruit they can eat, this leaf they can eat, you know, this thing that they just don't eat. So what I said is like we can put camera traps and like really focus in on like fruits or like leaves that are like starting to flush, and see if the primates come in. Because normally we do know from like some you know, a kind of accidents where people left up camera traps because they couldn't get them down, is that, and they kept running, and then they saw all these primates coming in, you know, as fruits were ripening. So I kind of tried to do that, and from species we know that primates are definitely not eating. So we have like weeks and weeks and weeks of data. They were also just not coming in. Like ideally you would, you know, put camera traps in more of the same species, but this was kind of a pilot thing. And we just did not see them coming in. We did have like a very precise, detailed kind of leaf flush movie of the species like getting their leaves. And then one species, which is Patahonula cordiates right now, they have these really weird small fruits that stay in the middle of like the petals. And so they're really hard to find, and it looks like the tree still has flowers, but that's like not the case. And so so I have some footage where they do come in. It's hard to see if they're actually eating the fruits, but just based on the amount of time they spent, and kind of like you can see them kind of like moving around this like little patch. Like that's like kind of typical monkey behavior, and indicates like, okay, they're foraging. They're not just, you know, if they're socializing, their behavior is very different. If they're resting, it's very different. If they're just moving through, like it's very different. So we did get some imagery. I wish they would have done that during the day. It was easier to see, but no. That's kind of what I was trying to like get at, like that you can get some of this like dietary information from like really focusing on how you place camera traps and during what periods of time. And basically what I was doing was time lapse, and not videos, just time lapse, because trees move. And so not you have like lots of videos just because, you know, a branch moves. And so why this is kind of important, so not just because we have 300 primate species and we know nothing about them, most of them, but also because we have many tree species. So we kind of need to find methods where we learn more about these tree species. So we need a lot more tree climbers. So we need, let's say there are 50,000 species in the tropics alone. So we need at least 50,000 tree climbers, one for each species. I think that's a good goal. And then, I mean, I don't even know what this is, like 2 trillion. So these are estimates, of course. So like there's lots to climb in the world, and there's lots to learn. So I'm really into like kind of having these like big databases and like kind of connecting them. So that's really what I like. So that is kind of like basically my general idea. Like you get these tree climbers, you know, you train them. My friend Noah, you go up, you get these samples, and you get these other measurements on tree species. And of most of these tree species, as I said, we don't have that. Like people have started collecting them in databases, which is really, really good. So you can freely access those. And that's really like how we should do science, to like share our data with everyone to use again. And so I got some of the data as well. get this information on traits, things like weight, nutrients, sizes, stuff like that, things that are like of interest to like animals, basically. And then get information on forest composition, whether you do that with drones, imagery, or on the ground. Even when you're doing it with imagery, you will have to do some ground truthing, they call it. So you can connect like this species to like this pixel, basically. And then basically, so what I'm doing is like all putting it together into these kind of big databases and spatial imagery to then figure out like what are kind of like the nutrients or traits on the ground spatially. And then ideally, if we do this with other primates, so we have a lot of information on these primate species. So that's really useful. And we have a lot of information on the tree species in this forest. So that's also why this was a good study site to kind of like test this out. But if you're working with other primates that are not habituated, then you could get that kind of data and then connect those two kinds of different data sets. And it doesn't always have to be this complicated, basically, with all these data. But I think we do, need to merge those two, and there are ways to do that. So that is kind of what I was focusing on, and kind of what I got funded for. So now I have all this data which needs to get analyzed. I need some time for that. Perhaps some more people that can code and Python would be nice. So, I mean, as we're connecting people and forests and trees, I just kind of want to point out, you don't do this alone. In some way, I mean, COVID made it difficult to do research, but I also got very lucky because of that. Because normally we get a lot of volunteers from other countries, and they just, work as research assistants as I did, and they're just in the field and they get experience. But of course, no one could get into the country or out. And if they did get out, like they stayed out, like a friend of mine, he got out in like this little window in August that we had. And so I had to find people in like the local community, so in the city. And it's actually, I want to say, it's so rewarding. It was difficult, like in the beginning, especially because I'm not a language person. So we had some language barriers once in a while. But it's so rewarding because like you don't realize, and these are not like indigenous people, right? These are people from basically European descent, kind of Argentinians, and they go to university, but half of the time they have no clue what's going on in the forest in their backyard, right? So it was just really rewarding because they had so much fun and then learned so many things, and I learned so many things from them. And mainly also we learned like different things of like how to kind of teach. So in Formosa, they're really like, I'm the professor, I know this, you have to remember it exactly as I tell you. And then for me, they kind of learned like, no, this can be an interaction. We can have a conversation, like, explain to me why you think what this is and what it does, because I want to know as well. So they kind of like, in the beginning was kind of like this weird like top-down approach, and they would say like ma'am all the time, stuff like that, and like, or they try to be really like knowledgeable, like, no, this is this species, and I would just be like, I don't think so, can we talk? And they would just not, because they were just in that mindset of like, this is how we do things. And so they learned a lot. They learned to climb trees. Noah always carried our helmets around. I don't know why. She always had this string of helmets connected to her. And we also went to little neighborhoods and like practiced transfers in little trees in people's backyards, basically, because we had no access to things. So I just sat in the middle of the tree and they just had to go around and around and around. We took up people that had been working in the forest for a long time and just, never went up into the trees. I wish I'd done more outreach, but it was, and I hope to do more in the future, but yeah, it was still challenging, but also it was really rewarding. And so what is next is like, one, I want to stay connected with these folks. They're fun to be around, also to do these weird poses in the forest, to pretend we're looking at monkeys. We're all looking at different monkeys, apparently, stuff like that. So they're really fun to be around. And some of them got really into this kind of tree climbing, facilitating business. So we like practiced it a little bit and took some folks up, some young nephews and nieces. And I did. I have to say, if Seesaw is still here, I really used you guys as an example because I had such a hard time explaining that this can be like, you know, a business, that you can make a living off of this. This can happen. It's really hard to make people kind of like see that bigger picture. So Javier is definitely seeing that. So I left all my tree climbing gear behind, thousands of dollars worth of tree climbing gear, basically. Because you can't get, I mean, you can, but it's so expensive to get tree climbing gear in these other parts. They can basically only buy from Petzl. It's twice as expensive. So I don't know how like Seesaw is dealing with this, but like it's incredible. And so I basically just left it all behind. And so they are using the gear that, you know, they have now. And we definitely have to add to that if they want to start like a tree climbing company. Which kind of is their idea, and they really want me to come back, and you know, Noah made a logo just for me so I could come back. Kind of branded me, I don't know. So that's kind of the idea, to keep, you know, I've discovered a little bit like you can jump around between different projects and different forests, but in the end it's very useful to be like an expert kind of in one place and to be known like in one place, and not just be this person that comes in for a week. And you know, if you're just like helping to collect samples, that's great. But if you're there to be like, let's study this or this because it's necessary and we need to know more about it, it's really useful to just kind of stay there so they get to know you. And no, it's not just for like, you know, you know, I don't know, the trend of the week or whatever, but that you're connected and invested. So that's kind of my idea. So I want to thank you for your attention. I know this was longer than expected. Sorry. And these are the little owl monkeys. They are also thanking you guys. Also, the howler monkeys were very useful. They kept us awake with their sounds during the day. Very useful. So that's the other species. I want to say thank you to my friends during COVID because they always sent me fun memes about what was going on. Of course, cats always kind of like won in those memes. So they were good. So we actually had to get permits to get out of our block. So that's kind of what it was referring to. Like you could get groceries, but anything beyond that, you needed a permit. And there was no way to get out. So we had all these like fun things that we kind of had to hold on to get through this period. And then of course, like some of the sponsors like Seal Boulder and National Geographic and NSF. So yeah, if there are any questions, I will take them now. Sorry for the long talk. This is what happens. We don't have enough time to prepare. So yeah, let me know.
Griette, I just want to say that was such a great talk. Thank you so much. Yeah, wow, you have seen so much and climbed so much, and yeah, your work is absolutely amazing. Really, really incredible. And what I was particularly impressed with was your idea and your view of these larger data sets, the larger long time data sets. Why is it that we don't have more of them? Is it a funding issue, or is it just time, or what do you think?
Why we don't have more like large data sets?
Yeah, and data sets that are maybe shared, you know.
Right. It's a cultural thing in academia. I think, I am not sure if like Adam agrees, but I think until kind of recently, even though it was kind of encouraged for people to make their data public, it wasn't like enforced. And I would say people are still not reinforcing it. But for example, now, if you write a proposal and ask for funding from NSF, you have to almost like write a page just indicating how you're going to share your data. This was not a thing that they had to do in the past. So many people, although they might have like a one-liner on their website that says like, if you are interested in data, like contact me. Like, how often do you find that? Well, now you kind of have to say like, okay, I'm going to put my database or my data in this giant database that's really, really public and visible. I'm going to put it here where people can just get it. And so that has kind of like shifted a little bit. But people are still a cultural thing kind of in academia where people are like, this is my data. Let me hold on to this. Yeah. And it's not what it should be.
Yeah.
Don't know if Adam agrees, but that's kind of my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to what you were saying about the citizen science, and it would be wonderful to have these data sets that people could just add to or contribute to. And I understand that that could very well dilute the scientific methodologies and I guess, yeah, I'm looking for a word, but yeah, it might not be accepted. But I also feel with so many people interested in tree climbing and in the habitats and species, and I think that it's maybe just another level of data that could be shared.
Yeah, so there is, so iNaturalist is kind of a general citizen science like platform. So if you find species, if you know anything, whatever creature it is, or plant or tree, and you know which it is, you take a picture, you know where it's located. And it doesn't have to be a special species, it can be common. Like you can upload that, and then other people in your area will kind of see that. And then normally it's, other people are asked to kind of identify that, or, kind of confirm the identification. You can even upload it without an identification, I think. So that's kind of like a general, citizen science platform. But I would say not enough people are doing that. I do have to say National Geographic is really pushing for that. So they're really collaborating with iNaturalist to kind of get the word out. There's special grants actually from iNaturalist and National Geographic to kind of set up these projects where you teach people how to use it, go out, or have these like kind of like days or weeks where you just go out and find as many species as you want and upload them. Yeah.
They do over here. There's a month every year that the RSPB, which is the largest bird charity and kind of rescue center, and they get people they specialize it in people that are living in urban areas, and it's literally for a month you have to or they advise you to put like a little notebook and a guide identification book next to your window in your kitchen or your living room that looks outside. And if you have a bird feeder, or even if you just have a garden, and then you just jot down all the birds you see in the month, and then you hand it over. And I mean, yeah, sure, there's many variables, but they get some great feedback from it. And just something as vague as that over 20 years, I think would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, those things are really interesting and helpful in general. I really wish, like, also for all tree climbers, I really wish that every time they went up and saw a creature, that they would just like indeed go to iNaturalist or whatever and just like upload a picture and be like, and like you said, you don't even have to identify it, right? You can be like, Adam is confirming that. Yeah. And it's also the case with primates, where I just kind of collected all the dietary information I could find of like all monkeys in general, the entire genus in South America. And sometimes, because there's so little information, like there were lots of like publications where people just said like, also I saw that all monkeys feeding in like these three species. And I know there's no data on this. And it's like, well, that's amazing. Thank you for just putting that in your thesis, because now I know that like, they eat this. I don't know how, for how long, if it's very important, but I know they can eat it. So I wish more people would do that. But sometimes there's just no space, because, and especially nowadays, people want you to write shorter and shorter articles, and more kind of information is delegated to like supplementary information. So still there, you can still put it in there, you just have to like do more digging.
Cool. And why primates? Why monkeys?
Well, so that's, maybe I didn't like explicitly say it. That's what I'm saying. Like sometimes life just happens. So I just happened to grow up in this place with this primate park, like the zoo, but just, I think we have over 30 species of primates. And then I just needed a job, like just a part-time job. And it was actually really funny, because I had kind of like a burnout when I was 16 because of high school, and I had a job, was working at the supermarket, it was like going to the scouts, I was playing music. And so I was doing all these things, and I had a little burnout. So I stopped working, quit my job at the supermarket. And that's not a thing you do as a Dutch person, you know, we're supposed to work. And so my grandfather actually said, like, why don't you have a job? And then he got kind of mad, and I was like, I will get a job right now. And they just had this ad in like the newspaper. And so my sister was like, why don't you call the zoo? So it was basically because I got so mad at my grandfather for kind of being, why aren't you working, that I got the job. So I called, and the next week I was working there. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes things are just like that. Like I was always interested in rainforest, but then that kind of happened. And like primates are just so amazing. They're really diverse. It's just, I would say they're just the main kind of, I nothing against your lizards. Sorry, Adam. They're just such an important like aspect of tropical canopies. They play really important roles in things like seed dispersal, which is, you know, related to species dispersion and regeneration. And I think of course, there are tropical forests in the world without primates, basically because of biogeography and evolution in the past. But most tropical forests are just something you cannot miss. They're just so important to the entire system. But they live in the canopies for the most part, not all of them, and it makes it hard to study them. And then they're just so much like us. So just looking at these primates, like I always said, like it's a little, it's like a little like telenovela, like this little like TV show that I'm looking at sometimes. Because if you look at a group of primates and just know all the individuals, just their relationships and like how they interact socially, is just they are, of course, we are a primate. We are a part of the primate family of that lineage, and so we can really relate to them. So also in that respect, it's like I think primates can play a very large role in kind of like communicating with people why forests are important to protect. Because, so I'm so happy that Adam was able to like, make that connection with humans and the communities in a lizard. But often it's really impressive. But like often, like if you just say, you look at primates and people are like, oh yeah, and they immediately love it. And so you can really utilize it as one conservation. All these kind of like nice, iconic kind of species, and they're really helpful to connect people. And it's surprising how many people in Formosa like do not know the species. So there are only 2 species of primates, and they know the howlers because they make noise and they enter like the cities a little bit more, and they just don't know the Merikina, just the owl monkeys. But once they do, they really get into it. They're really into conserving and knowing more about them.
Amazing work. Well
so many things, so many reasons to study primates, and they're just awesome. They're just simply awesome. Come on, you go into a forest, they're always, everyone loves them.